sound good. I'm going to interrupt you here. We're going to look at Songs of Innocence and Experience by William Blake, and with this make the transition from the neoclassical period that we looked at the last two classes, the age of Pope and Swift, in philosophy often called the age of reason, or the Enlightenment, but from the literary stance, the neoclassical era, or sometimes the age of satire, for reasons that you discerned last time. There's a lot of satire. Very common to observe that satire comes at a time when bodies politic, whether in Greece or in Rome or in England, are in a state of some sort of decadence, stability, but also with imperial features as well, and I think it is the case here. And the politics of the day are in some ways fairly stable, and a great deal of wealth is accumulating throughout the 18th century because of the Enlightenment, but also a degree of what do we call it in history? They call it enlightened absolutism. So the monarchs of Europe are growing more and more powerful in their rule over their populaces, and they have more centralized control. And despite the growth in wealth, there's an increasing sense of a gulf between the rich and the poor, and a sense that amongst the poor, that the wealthy simply are out of touch or don't care about their populaces. So famously in France, this leads to the French Revolution in 1789. I say that because it's contemporary with this period, and it's the great political event of the era. So 1789, the French Revolution. And the mottos of the French Revolution are liberty, equality, fraternity. Relatively, almost the same time as in the United States, we have the Declaration of Independence, 1776, 1789. Many of the same ideas percolating in France as are in the United States. There are significant differences there. The American colonies are largely Christian in their understanding of themselves, and the reasons for revolting against the King of England are rather different than are those in France. But many ideas of liberty and are being spoken of in both cases. And many of the poets that we're looking at today, or we're going to begin to look at, starting with William Blake, the Romantics, are very sympathetic to the French Revolution and its ideals. And what they share in common, at least as they articulate it, is a belief that the age of reason has dehumanized the world, and the appeal to understand everything in terms of reason, at least the Enlightenment's idea of reason, has had no feeling in it. There's no human sympathy, there's no compassion, there's no sense of anything humane in it. And to some degree, we saw that expressed last time when we looked at Jonathan Swift and his modest proposal, that what was proposed to be not just modest, but beneficial to everybody is actually, to put it mildly, inhumane, if not barbaric. And yet it sounded like a reasonable proposal in some ways until you actually looked at it and saw how horrid the consequences were. But he made a utilitarian argument. This is beneficial, it's productive, it makes economic sense to eat our babies, or eat the babies of the Irish at any rate. As long as you pay them for it, then this is a great idea. This idea of looking at human nature in terms of economic productivity is the very thing that the French Revolution was animated against. And in England, Blake is one of the many Romantic authors, that at least we'll call them Romantics, who are seeing this as not just a political thing, but it's a problem of the intellect. The Enlightenment has looked at humanity through the lenses of reason, and the Romantics think this is the wrong way to see human nature. And his Songs of Innocence and Experience, and you probably can't see the subtitle here, so I'll read it to you, says, showing the two contrary states of the human soul, is a way for him to express a different way of looking at human nature. Obviously, one of innocence, the other of experience. And if I put the titles of the poems here on the screen behind me, you will see that there's a variety, a whole list of songs of innocence, and then a whole list of songs of experience. And one of the many features you'll notice of it is that they have seemingly, like it said, contrary states of the human soul. So we'll have an introduction here and an introduction there. We'll have the lamb here. We'll have the tiger here. We'll have the divine image here. We'll have the human abstract here. We'll have the little black boy here, and we'll have the little black boy similarly down here. Where is it? He's there anyway. There's a chimney sweeper song in both cases, and so there's a lot of parallels. And you'll look at one, and then you'll look at the other. And the purpose of this is to show contrary states of the human soul, to add a little bit of depth and a little bit of differentiation between two human states, one of innocence and one of experience. But it is in the Romantic period that we get a revision, or we get the idea or the resuscitation of an ancient Christian heresy, which is that we are born in innocence. Does anyone know the name of that heresy, that we're by nature innocent? And we are born innocent, and then we fall along the way. Does anyone know the name of that heresy? Because Orthodox Christian theology will say that we are originally created by God innocent, and yet after the fall, we've all, with Adam, fallen. We've inherited a sin. It's called original sin, and we are, even though we are born without cognizance of what Adam and Eve did, nonetheless, because of their original sin, we have inherited that sin. So we are born not innocent, but rather tainted by their original sin. And we can see it in even small babies, that they don't act out of innocence, but rather there's something fallen in them from, you can see it very early on. It's hard to believe when you look at them and you don't have children, but when you have children, it's very easy to believe in original sin. Because you say, well, I have done things wrong, but there's no way that that baby got that from any experience around them. Like, you don't need to teach children to sin. It's just there. Now, you can magnify it by treating a child badly. They can become worse, but the actual problem of sin does not come after the fact. It's already there. But there is a British monk who speculated, and his name's now, it's evading me temporarily. Well, Pelagius. Pelagius and the Pelagian heresy posited that we are actually still fundamentally good, and that sin is something that we develop over the course of our experience. But in our primal state, we are good. Now, if that's true, what Pelagius says, that we're good, and sin comes in after the fact, then it is possible then to avoid sin. And it's also possible, if our state is originally good, to some degree say, we're not responsible for any sin that comes after, because in our own nature, as we were originally, when we were first born, we weren't sinful. So therefore, it's not our fault, it's our parents' fault, or it's society's fault, or whatever. And it's also the case then, if Pelagius is correct and our sin is unfallen, that through education, we can avoid the consequences of sin. We can try and eliminate them through proper teaching. We just need to direct children the right way. We need to avoid the consequences of sin in life, and we will thereby create a better society. Now, this is the view of the Romantics in general. They're Pelagian in their view of human nature. And the consequences of that are also seen in their poetics and also in the educational philosophy that emerges thereafter, which is concurrent, by the way, with public education. So I should say that, although it's going to come after that, the what we now call public education is a 19th century phenomenon. It does not exist before the 19th century. So most of us go to public schools. 19th, 20th, 21st century, mass education through the public school system. The dominant philosophy of the public education system is Pelagian in its views, and will regard sin or crime or injustice as something that, yes, it occurs, but it's not part of our nature, and therefore we can avoid it. We can make progress away from those things just through education. That's not the Christian view. And it's not the view that would have been taught up until this point, where education was taught primarily through families and specifically through Christian schools. But come the 19th century, education is taken over by the state, and it becomes, and it's largely Pelagian in its view of human nature. And so it has a certain effect of that, and we call this progressivism. And the belief that we can basically avoid the social consequences of crime just by the right conditions and the right teaching. And humanity will get better if we just educate better. Yes? Yes. So the problem is, the question is, nobody denies, including the Romantics, that there is this thing called injustice. And you might even want to call it sin, although in general the Romantics avoid that word. But a sense of evil. They will affirm very strongly, and in fact they will quite strongly speak against the injustice in the world, specifically in the French Revolution and all the things that caused the French Revolution. But it's their analysis of how deep the problem goes that's the problem. Because they think that sin is something we can avoid by proper education. And that is the problem. Because if the problem is actually a sinful human nature, then we can't fix the problem because we are the sinners themselves. So that the question can be put, and let me put this up here, as a question. I ran out of the room there. Hope you can read that. So are we sinners because we sin, or do we sin because we are sinners? Now, both are going to be true in some sense, right? But the question is, where is the downbeat in your view on this? Everyone's going to affirm this. You know, when somebody sins, that makes them a sinner. All right, that's not a problem. So everyone can affirm this, including Pelagius. When we sin, that makes us sinners. But is Pelagius going to affirm this one? We sin because we're sinners. He's going to say no. because sinners is the ontological state, as it were. That's why we sin, because we are sinners. Whereas this one just simply calls us sinners because of the fact we've sinned, but it opens the possibility that maybe we could have done something other than sin. Right? Can you see? But whereas here it's unavoidable because you are a sinner. It's called original sin, you've inherited it. Right? So Pelagius will agree with this one, but not agree with the orthodox position of Christian theology that actually the reason that we sin is because we are sinners. Now, as I say, in Scripture, it's quite clear that we're presented as sinners. Not just that we sin, but we are sinners, and that's why we sin. If the Romantics' view is correct, then the fact that we sin, which they don't deny, is not intrinsic to our nature, and therefore we could avoid it. And the way we would avoid it is through education and thinking differently. And that thinking differently is precisely what the Romantics propose to do. They're going to think about things differently, a different way of looking at things. And the different way of looking at things, they are going to say, is what they will call the imagination. So the Age of Enlightenment presents the use of reason as the way of leading to a better society. They'll say we want to be rational, as opposed to the unexamined prejudices of the Christian era. We don't want to be dogmatic. We don't want to be bigoted. We don't want to be biased. We don't want to be prejudiced. We want to use pure reason. The Romantics say, your attempt to clear the field entirely of all prejudice creates a problem against human nature. It violates human nature to be rational in this way. It doesn't solve the problem. The way we solve the problem is by paying attention to our feelings. So if you want to put it very simply, the Enlightenment will propose reason as the solution to human problems. The Romantics will propose feelings as the solution to human problems. We just need to empathize with other people. We need to understand what it's like to be them. We need to feel their pain. And if we do that, if we have a sense of attachment to other people that allows us to feel their feelings, that will allow us to avoid what we call sins against other people, or crimes, or injustices. So it's an agenda using feeling to solve the problems of human nature, and it will appeal to the human heart. And it becomes very much a part of the discipline that we call psychology, the attention to feelings as opposed to thoughts. And in pop psychology, it can even be differentiated by sex. Men are from Mars and women from Venus, that sort of thing. And you get it presented in science fiction. You get the Mr. Spocks that are the rational, detached, or Mr. Data, if you want, Next Generation, purely intellectual. That's how he solves all problems. Or you can go in the Star Trek original. Does anyone watch Star Trek, care about Star Trek? No. In the original series, you've got Dr. McCoy, who is a man who thinks in accordance with his feelings. In the Next Generation, it's Counselor Troy, a female, I can't remember what she's called, an empath, I don't know. And she feels the other people's sensations, and she's the counselor that appeals to feelings. And the combination of the two, we could say, your mind and your feelings put together, that's going to give you the full picture of the problem. And if you just put them two together, then we can avoid sin. I think they're both nonsense. Because the problem of sin is deeper than your feelings and it's deeper than your thoughts. It's a spiritual condition, and it's connected to our relation to God, who we've turned our back to, which is an active offense. We're no longer orientated towards God. We are gods unto ourselves. We determine what's good and evil for ourselves, including the way of reconciling ourselves to God, which is through our feelings or through our reason. Neither of those are going to work. Sin is deeper than that. But the Romantics in general, so I'm giving you my response to it before I even show it to you, but I want to get into what Blake proposes here as typical of the Romantic period. But let's just look at a few of the poems here. By the way, Blake's born in 1757 and dies, is it 1832 or thereabouts, something like that. No, it can't be 1832. What does it say here on Wikipedia? 1827. So there you go. Wikipedia is good for things like dates, usually. I don't trust it too much beyond that, but basic things. It's going to be good. Oh, one other thing about Blake, and you might have seen this or might have wondered the picture I showed you right at the outset. This is Blake's own engraving. So Blake is a really interesting character insofar as he's not just a poet, but he is a graphic artist. And that's how he made his living. It was largely from his paintings and engravings. So this is his, and if we look at this Project Gutenberg thing, this is also his. So the poem is written here, and there's little pictures in and along there. Or there again, Song of Innocence. You have a little lamb, you have a child holding the lamb, you have a mother looking down, you have a tree, and maybe a serpent going around it, not entirely clear, but you can see it's rather attractive in its presentation. But let me read the introduction to the Songs of Innocence first, and I'll make a couple observations about it, and then I'm going to jump down immediately to its counterpart in the Songs of Experience, just to illustrate the sort of commonality of vision. And yet also the two contrary ways that you will see innocence and experience. So let me just read it. So introduction. Piping down the valleys wild, piping songs of pleasant glee, on a cloud I saw a child, and he laughing said to me, pipe a song about a lamb. So I piped with merry cheer. Piper, pipe that song again. So I piped. He wept to hear. Drop thy pipe, thy happy pipe, sing thy songs of happy cheer. So I sung the same again, while he wept with joy to hear. Piper, sit thee down and write in a book that all may read. So he vanished from my sight, and I plucked a hollow reed, and I made a rural pen, and I stained the water clear, and I wrote my happy songs, every child may joy to hear. Now, let me just ask you before I say anything, what are your impressions of the poem? What strikes you about it? Just the general tone. Is it simple? Is it like... It's bright. Childlike. Good. Yeah, very good. Yes. In the like the rhyme scheme, I mean, so each stanza is 4 lines, and there's the pipe and the cheer, and again and the here. The cheer and the here rhyme, and the reed and the reed, and the clear and the here, right? Same with a glee and me. So there's a little bit of a rhyme in lines 2 and 4 of each of the stanzas. So there's a regularity about it. Yep. And I liked bright and childish, including in the choice of words, right? Like, I don't know what age you would need to be to have this vocabulary, but it's pretty young. This is not complex poetry. I mean, it's not Milton's diction. He's not using words of classical deities and that you've never heard of before. You don't need to know Latin to read Blake and understand him entirely. So simplicity of diction. The tone is cheerful. I like that, and true. There's a brightness about it. As far as the characters in it, or the agents, what have we got? We've got a child, we got a piper, and we got a lamb. Where would we find a child, a piper, and a lamb? In a city, in the country. Country. Right? So it's the agrarian ideal. Countryside. What else? Note that the lamb is capitalized. Did that strike you at all? What did it make you think of? Jesus, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Intentional on Blake's part, of course. And of course, so there's a complexity even to the sense of a lamb. A lamb is a young sheep and is a figure of innocence, but also is used for sacrifice in the Old Testament. And of course, Christ refers to, or John the Baptist refers to Christ as that. And so it has theological overtones as well. And Blake's pulling those right into his songs of innocence right away. Okay, then how about the actual narrative in the poem? What happens here? I want you to note a progression. It's the valleys wild, he's piping songs, and he sees a child on a cloud, which is a strange, so it's a dreamlike sequence, because children aren't actually on the clouds, unless the child is something like one of those fat babies, cherubs like you see in Renaissance painting, called putti, one of those, the fat babies with the wings, and it may be that, but we don't really have that. The child's laughing, and the laughing child speaks to the piper and tells the piper to pipe. Piper, pipe a song about a lamb, so I piped with merry cheer. Piper, pipe that song again, so I piped. He wept to hear. Hold on. We go from laughing to weeping. Why is he weeping? Note the progression. Begins with cheer, then it immediately moves to weeping. How come? It's not clear, actually, but we just note there's a progression from delight and cheer immediately to weeping, even though the child asks for the song. Then the child asks the piper to drop the pipe and to sing without the pipe. He sings without the pipe, and nonetheless, he's still weeping. Though this time, he weeps with joy. So here he's laughing and he's joyful. Here he's weeping with the pipe. He gets rid of the pipe, and now he weeps with joy. Let's try a different thing. 3 times a command. Pipe, drop thy pipe, sit thee down and write. Progression. And in this, he says, sit down and write the song that you were first piping and then singing in a book. At which point, what happens? And the piper, in turn, plucks a hollow reed, takes something out of the natural realm, and makes a rural pen, which stains the water clear, writes the happy songs every child may joy to hear. But what is there a sense, even in this very first song of innocence, there's a sense of the fall that's crept into this portrait. It's a theory of the 18th century, commonly expressed, but particularly by a writer by the name of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You heard of Rousseau? He's also a romantic. That and he's not the only one that supposes this, but he conjectures that the earliest human expressions were poetry, not prose, and that the earliest words that were articulated were grunts and cries, inarticulate grunts and cries, and they were full of passionate feeling. So like cavemen, they would see something, go, really get excited, or a high-pitched whatever in the chords. They would make noises like animals, in other words. So the first sounds that came from human beings were grunts and cries. And only later, as they developed intellectually, they started articulating the sounds into words. So that view of language is that it begins as a powerful expression of feeling. Human language is a powerful expression of feeling, just like a songbird when it sings, or animals when they howl or cry or bark or meow or whatever. They're expressing their feelings, they're drawing attention to something, but they're not articulating in a way that is comprehensible. So feeling precedes reasoning. Because when language becomes articulated, we're using a word to understand it. But that is a stage of human development that comes later. And the oral songs that originated in poetry give way to writing them down. Now, this is a theory of how language develops. It's very common in the 18th century. And it's held to this very day, by the way, because people still believe that the earliest people on Earth were cavemen, and who wrote oral poetry eventually, or composed oral poetry, but they didn't write it down. But the earliest human beings are presented as effectively hominoids that are not really differentiated from animals or monkeys. You've heard of this view. It didn't originate with Charles Darwin, by the way. This is a long-standing view of human development. We originated from some sort of pre-rational being and eventually became rational. And as we did, we moved from a feeling or an age of feeling and strong sentiment close to our original nature towards something that is more logical, the age of the philosophers, like you've seen in the Greeks, eventually towards a religious age, and then finally to a rational age. And at each stage, we become more and more fallen. That's the view that Rousseau presents. That reasoning is a late development in humanity, and it is alien to our true nature, which is closer to the way we connect with animals or babies. You don't have to talk to the baby. You can make coos and cries, goo goo gaga, that sort of thing. And the baby makes also noises of joy, delight, anger, whatever, and those are central to its formation. So we take the child as the model for every human being, and you posit the child's innocence as a representation of your own state and the whole state of humanity as well. Does it make any sense? Like, there's a logic to it at any rate. No, I don't know if it makes any sense or not. Does it sound familiar? If you study anthropology, this is how early primitive societies are presented. They don't write anything down. They have oral traditions, but they don't actually write them down. That's a later development, and the later developments are superior in one sense and inferior in another sense. Inferior in the sense that they're not as closely connected to their natures, but inferior in the sense that they can't pass it down and we can't examine it, etc. Anyway, when he writes it down in a book and the child vanishes from his sight, what is being lost is the imaginative vision that prompts the whole thing to begin with. As you get older and as societies progress and they write things down, their imagination dies with them. And so to recover our lost innocence, we need to recover the childish imagination and seeing things that aren't there that the child sees when he plays. Now, it's a theory of education. Play therapy, play. We connect through that means. It's all predicated, as I say, on a Pelagian view of human nature, which is then given a whole anthropological say. But he vanishes at this point, and then he plucks a whole reed, and to some degree at this point, he not only loses the imaginative vision of the child, but he also desecrates nature. Because with his rural pen, he stains the water clear, environmental degradation, and although he writes happy songs, there's something that's been lost. Even in the original beginning of the Song of Innocence. Now, I've read a lot into that, but this is my era of specialization. Romantic literature, this is what I wrote my doctoral thesis on, although I didn't focus on Blake, still. So I've said a lot there rather quickly. I want to move on to the introduction to Song of Experience, And it's again a introduction, but I want you to see the differences between the two visions. So there's the painting there, or look at the depiction. What do we have here? Death. Before we had a baby on the knee of the mother. Here we have the weeping over the effigy of a dead person. So experience is a little different. But the introduction. Hear the voice of the bard. A bard is a poet. Hear the voice of the bard who present, past, and future sees. Whose ears have heard the holy word that walked among the ancient trees, calling the lapsed soul and weeping in the evening dew, that might control the starry pole and fallen light renew. O earth, return, arise from out the dewy grass. Night is worn, and the morn rises from the slumberous mass. Turn away no more. Why wilt thou turn away? The starry floor, the watery shore, is given thee till the break of day. What do you notice about the tone? Especially in comparison to the first. Is it more complicated? Is it? Yes, go ahead. Much stronger sense of mourning, I think, than the first. Although, as I said, the first introduces the idea of sorrow, right? Almost right away, yes? Desperation. Well, in the sense that here, O earth, return, arise from out the dewy grass. So there's a, yeah? Yes? It is. So it talks about a lapsed soul, even the idea of a soul. It's a theological concept. I mean, what is it? Can I see a soul? I can see a body. A soul. It's a theological term, or it's a philosophical term. So it's more language of adults. The idea of a lapsed soul, well, that's a fallen one. That's even more theological. So is the idea of a bard who present, past, and future sees. Well, that is omniscience. That's the God perspective. Well, that, again, the idea of thinking in terms of something that has no time dimension is a much more developed later sense, and makes an explicit reference to Genesis 17, I think. Whose ears have heard the holy word that walked among the ancient trees at Mamre, where Abraham entertains the three angelic visitors. Right? The word that walks among the ancient trees. Or you could even suggest it's Genesis, where Adam and Eve hear God walking in their midst. Could be that as well, but it's a biblical reference at that point. So and you have to have read that then. It's not just something you get from walking around in the grass outside. You have to have an intellectual, bookish knowledge then at that point. And of course, with that, then that voice is calling to the lapses. So it's much more Christian in its language. Like the first one had the sense of Christianity because it had the capital L, Lamb, but this is more theologically sophisticated. And its diction, it's got 5-line stanzas. It does have the rhyme scheme of 2 and 4, or 2 and 5 and 3 and 4 rhyme together, a little bit different and so forth. But again, like you said, the night is worn in the morn, so everything is sort of desperate, I think was the word. More of a sense of not so simple and easy and light as it was before. And yeah, all of that sense there. And it's given thee till the break of day. There's a sense of the limitation on life. And as I said, if you have in accompanying with that pictures like this, it's just going to add to the sense that you had just from reading the words. So it's a feeling that's conveyed. And the feelings really do matter because they're showing contrary states of the human soul. What does Blake mean by the soul? Is it a Christian understanding? Or does he mean the psyche, the feeling. By the way, in the discipline of psychology, there are 60 to 100 different schools of psychology, none of which will agree on what the psyche is. I shouldn't say none of which. All of which are considered to be official and legitimate branches of psychology, and they will disagree fundamentally on what the psyche is that they're studying as a scientific subject. Is it the brain? Because the dominant view of psychology in our day is that the psyche is the brain. So they study the brain, they study chemistry, they give you chemicals to deal with mental health issues and so forth. Or is it something that's metaphysical, something that's not physical? Like your spirit. And what's the relation between the brain and the soul, or the brain and the psyche then? But again, within the discipline, there's no agreement on what the psyche is that they're studying. They come at it from different vantage points. Anyway, I didn't need to go in that direction, but I just find that interesting. So there's the introduction. What else should I look at? How about the Lamb? This is famous. And you'll see innocence and experience are presented rather differently. Sometimes positive and negative, sometimes just different. And in this case, different and not negative. The Lamb. Again, the Lamb, clear Christian reference to Christ. But here, not so much, because it's a little L Lamb. Little Lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead, gave thee clothing of delight, soft as clothing, woolly, bright, gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little Lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little Lamb, I'll tell thee. Little Lamb, I'll tell thee, he is called by thy name. For he calls himself a lamb, he is meek, and he is mild. He became a little child, I a child, and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little Lamb, God bless thee. Little Lamb, God bless thee. You can almost put these on one of those Christian greeting cards that you find at campgrounds. Little, Jesus, and there's the little lamb, and gives you lamb, and you think of yourself, isn't that great? I'm a lamb. Jesus is holding me. Sheep are the stupidest animals in the field, by the way. They're really fearful and dumb, and they're really dependent on the shepherd. So it's not a positive image of you. You're innocent, and he's holding on to you, and he's got his arms around you. Yeah. Shepherds don't pick up their sheep unless they're in serious danger, by the way, as well, because the mother's not going to touch them. But anyway, we don't need to get into lambs. But the image here, we have the child as the lamb, and then we have the lamb, capital L, Christ, tender voice, woolly, bright. But you can see, and the strong rhyme scheme, the name, mild child, name, lamb is a rhyme scheme. Lamb and name, thee and thee, those counts as rhyme. So we have rhyming couplets, very much like nursery rhyme. Right? So there's the Song of Innocence. Its counterpart in the Song of Experience is not a lamb, but rather a Tyger. His most famous poem, perhaps. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? And there's the picture of this. That's a pretty smiley tiger there. It doesn't look very fearful in this to me. But the presentation here is, on the one hand, he wants to present nature from the vantage point of a place of innocence. Clearly, it's a song of innocence. And it seems to be non-threatening. It seems to be soft. It seems to be amenable to mankind. There seems to be no threat. Nobody's afraid of a lamb. Lambs are things that get killed, not that kill. That would be a terrible horror movie in which the lamb was chasing you and biting you or something like that. It would be like a Monty Python killer rabbit that jumps at your neck. If you've ever seen Python. No? If not, watch it sometime. It's a killer rabbit and it gets people's necks and the blood spurts. Anyway. So the lamb, that would be a horror scenario. The lamb leaping and killing you, but then the lambs get killed. Whereas a tiger is going to hunt you. And the idea here, and Blake really wants to introduce this to us, is the idea that the creator of the lamb is also the creator of the tiger. So what sort of being is this that creates such fearsome, powerful beings as well as such timid and helpless ones? Is our idea of God big enough for that? It's the sort of questions that you get in Job 43. If you've ever read the book of Job, God asked Job, were you there when I created this? Were you there when I created Behemoth and Leviathan? Like, what did you teach the eagle to fly the way he did? Did you teach, like, were you there when? And not only did that, it makes a reference that every Milton student would recognize, the stars as the angels when they threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, a sort of a supernatural dimension to power. Right? I think that the stars here are reference to angels, and the fallen angels referred to in Paradise Lost. All of those are there. But again, in both cases now we have a portrait of not just the object created, the lamb or the tiger, but the relative softness or ferocity of the object, and both of them created by God. And we need both that. And here's the thing about Blake. He is not going to say that innocence is better than experience. And this is what makes Blake different than the other romantics. Blake says that we need both innocence and experience. To try and stay in a state of innocence is to become a religious person in his sensibilities, and to try and keep away evil by being nice. Just pretend it doesn't exist. Deny the ferocity of nature. Deny earthquakes. Deny disease. Deny injustice. Just go on and pretend that everything's okay. Sing a happy song. Whatever. And he says that's not going to work. There's goodness in innocence, but there's also goodness in experience, and you need to hold on to both of those. That's his, ends up being his position. Yes? That would be a Christian would say that, and he to some degree is probably wanting to comprehend that there are two aspects, both of which have goodness in it, and both of them can be bad as well. So yeah, I do think so to some degree. William Blake is not orthodox in his Christianity at all. He might call himself a Christian, but he opposes Christian orthodoxy on a point of principle, because he doesn't like codified religion. He believes in the truth of the human heart and its religious impulses and its feelings and its attractions and the imagination. He thinks the imagination is the vehicle, the godlike vehicle that God has placed in mankind in order to think God's thoughts after him. Protestants will say if we want to know what God's thoughts are, then we read the Bible. We're thinking God's thoughts after him. Blake will say that the Bible is holy, but it's because it's the code of Western art. The great code is how he regards the Bible. It's like an archetype. Very common in our day to read the Bible psychologically, as if it had the the basis, but the basis is there for us to imaginatively live the way we want to live and not see it as God's thoughts that we have to live in accordance with or break. That's not Blake. And he thinks the Christian doctrine, codification of it, is a product of the fall. Just like in the Song of Innocence, when he writes down the song, the codification of it is already an attempt to hold on to the imaginative or limit the imaginative expression that was originally there, and thereby it shows itself to be fallen. So he thinks that religions, as they're written down and organized, actually oppress rather than do what they're intended to do. It's a very popular view in his day. Strongly anti-religious, while at the same time he's a spiritual writer. And he regularly populates his poetry with Christian images, as you've already seen. And many of the things that Blake will cite, I think Christians will sympathize with. But it's in no way orthodox. And I would say further, not just that he's a Pelagian, he's an antinomian. He hates laws and codes and so forth. He believes in spirituality. He hates religion. Very common in Blake's day and has never gone away. Not that long ago, there was a church in Toronto that called itself a church that was for people not into church. It's a church against church. What does that mean? It's leaning at the same sort of thing. We're holding on to the original message of Jesus, but we're going to dispute that the Word of God is going to direct us on this. We're going to be directed by the Spirit and not by the Word. This is also characteristic of the Romantics. They listen to the Spirit and they say that the Word is an expression of the Spirit, but it's a codification and it loses the original fervor of the Spirit. So we're going to be Spirit-led rather than Word-directed. Romanticism is a source of terrific influence in education, in church life, and so forth, and it is a serious threat as well, I would say. Let me go to the Chimney Sweeper. The Chimney Sweeper is great as well. Chimney sweepers, if you've ever seen Mary Poppins, you know what a chimney sweeper is. In the Victorian era, houses were built, and in England, just like here, it gets cold outside. To heat the house, they used coal. Coal is found in abundance in the northeast of England, and it would be shipped down from Newcastle largely down to the east, and they would have coal fires. The problem with coal fires is that the soot from the coal lines the chimney, and it accrues pretty quickly, so that if you don't sweep them out, you get chimney fires. And the whole house can burn down. So you have to go down and sweep the chimneys, but you have to be small enough to do it. So what they do is they get little boys to go down and sweep out the chimneys. They actually have to go down into the chimney and push the soot out. And of course, they get filthy black doing so. So they shave their heads. The boys that do this tend to be from poor families, if not being orphans altogether. And they die young, because they're inhaling the coal dust. Sometimes their parents send them to do this because the parents need the financial wherewithal from the child labor and so forth. Blake is doing something that is typical of Blake. He's decrying the social injustice of chimney sweepers and the abuse of the poor and the vulnerable by the rich in this. So they heat their homes. It may need to be done, but they're exploiting the poor. Very much part of the French revolutionary spirit here, but the chimney sweeper. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry. Weep, 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 weep. So he can't say sweep. Weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, was shaved. So I said, Hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet. And that very night, as Tom was asleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing, they run, and wash in the river and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom, if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. In what sense is this a song of innocence? It's more complicated than the other poems, right? In what sense is this a song of innocence? Who's the innocent one? Is it the storyteller who's innocent? Is it the child that's innocent? Is it the moral of the story that's innocent? Or does it appear to be innocent while it's not innocent? I think there's a multiple senses of innocence here. There is a sense of innocence. It's the young boy who is dying and being sacrificed like a lamb, even being compared to it. His hair is woolly. He's got curly blonde hair. And they shave it off just like they shave a lamb before they slaughter him. So that a young boy is now being compared to a sacrifice that's being made to atone in some sense. But what's it atoning for? Well, and the message that he's given is that, first of all, cutting your hair is going to keep your hair from getting black. So, okay. And then the moral that if they'd be a good boy, then they'd have God for his father and never want joy. So if they obey and just do what they're told and brush the chimneys, they'll be with God in heaven. And Blake adds to that, so if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. Whose voice is this that says this? Is it a voice of religious sensibility, or is it a voice of hypocrisy? By the way, Blake is also a satirist. And this is savage satire. Even stronger in some sense than Jonathan Swift. You can see that he is attacking those that are sweeping the injustice of treating young boys like this under the carpet, just overlooking the injustice and telling the boys that if they go along with it, they'll be with God in heaven. Blake is not happy with that narrative, but then he presents it without criticism. The boy accepts it because he's told it. He trusts those in authority over him. So you see the picture there, and there's God, and there's little Tom, and there's the children rejoicing and so forth. Just like in Mary Poppins, little same sort of, she plucked it right. They've got it from William Blake. Okay, so there's the Chimney Sweeper from the Songs of Innocence. How about the Songs of Experience? A little black thing among the snow, crying, weep, weep, in notes of woe. Where are thy father and mother? Say, they are gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath and smiled among the winter's snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who made up a heaven of our misery. So, here we have the voice of cynicism, or not the voice of cynicism. They're the cynics. He is the voice of a boy that's been done a grave injustice. And he's bitter at the organized religion that's going to talk about praising God while his life is considered to be less worth than theirs. So it's a different sort of experience, and that is experienced the sin of the world, but the sin has been visited on him not just by the priest and the king, but is by his parents. So the older generation exploits the younger, and they benefit from it. So it's a fundamental injustice. He's on the side of the child, and so are we. Nobody who reads the poem can't be on the side of the child. You could find he does the same thing about the issue of different races. There's a reference to African. So let's look at the divine image. How much time do I have here? The divine image. I'm racing through these here. Song of Innocence, the divine image. The divine image, the image of God, is Genesis 1, 26, 27. So God created man in his image. In his image created he him, male and female created he them. We bear the image of God, the divine image. To mercy, pity, peace, and love, all pray in their distress, and to these virtues of delight return their thankfulness. For mercy, pity, peace, and love is God our Father dear, and mercy, pity, peace, and love is man, his child in care. For mercy has a human heart, pity a human face, and love the human form divine, and peace the human dress. Then every man of every clime that prays in his distress, prays to the human form divine, love, mercy, pity, peace. And all must love the human form, in heathen, Turk, or Jew. Where mercy, love, and pity dwell, there God is dwelling too. This is an appeal to virtues at the expense of organized religion. Not that you don't owe love to heathen or pagans and Turks, who here probably represent Islam, and the Jews, but he's effectively saying the religious distinctions between them are of less moment than the virtues demonstrated there. So it's more of an inclusive, again, a loving, how do we express that? So that's the Song of Innocence, Song of Experience. Let me see if I can find it here. Oh, a divine image. Cruelty has a human heart, and jealousy a human face. Terror, the human form divine, and secrecy, the human dress. The human dress is forged iron. The human form, a fiery forge. The human face, a furnace sealed. The human heart, its hungry gorge. Like, the difference in tone there is really stark and bitter. Got the hammer, the angry, downcast face. Finally, let's see here. I want to look at, where is it? It doesn't have a counterpart, but I want to read it anyway. It's called London. The reason I want to read that is the manifestation for Blake, just like pretty much all the Romantics, of the corruption of society and the building up of iniquity is represented in the city. The countryside is seen as a place of innocence and primal sympathies that exist between creatures and nature around us, and the experience and fallenness of the world is represented in the city. And Blake, who spent his entire life in London and was an engraver, sees in London something like Babylon the Great, where even the river that flows through it is marked by the fall. And Blake's portrait of London is very similar to the sort that we get in a later author, namely Charles Dickens, where life is bleak and marked by exploitation and disease and poverty and misery. And at the same time, some people are making a lot of money off it, that exploitation. So here's Blake's London. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow. A mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mine-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most, through midnight streets I hear, how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. One of his darker poems. I just want to note some of the features of it. You again see the tight structure, the rhyme, street, meet, flow, woe, man, ban, fear, hear, cry, sigh, appalls, walls, etc. So the rhyme scheme, the 4-line quatrains and so forth. But the landscape is marked by commodification. Money is being made on the backs of humanity. Even the streets are chartered. They have names and they are owned. The property is owned. It's not common to all. It's rather something that's subject to private ownership and chartering. And similarly, the Thames can be chartered. You can hire a boat to go out on the Thames. So everything, you can't go anywhere without paying a price. It's a cost put upon it. And the effect of this greed, because that's what he's portraying, is that in every face he sees marks of weakness and marks of woe. So if there's an original state of innocence where there's no sign of fallenness, London is the exact opposite. And he reiterates this through this threefold repetition in every and every and every. First every man, then every infant's cry, and then in every voice, and finally the fourth in every ban. The ban, by the way, you may not recognize this, will be a reference to marriage. Even in the thing that is supposedly an expression of love, the love of two people, which is a picture, an image of the love of God towards his church. Remember, Paul says this in Ephesians 5. The love between a man and a wife is a picture of Christ to his church. The bans of marriage are published or said before 2-3 weeks before a marriage takes place. They will announce to the church that John and Sally are going to get married in 3 weeks' time. If anyone knows a reason why they should not be married, come forward right now. So they proclaim that they're going to be married. And then they do it again. And then at the ceremony, they say, if there's any reason why anyone has to oppose this marriage, let them declare now or hold their peace. That's it. That happens. And then they get married. And the reason why is to prevent somebody who's already married from marrying somebody who's unmarried and all that. So it's to make sure that it happens that way. But even in the bands, he hears the mind-forged manacles. Manacles being shackles. It's a slavery in all the words that are expressed in London. There's slavery. Not slavery in everyone has shackles, but their minds are shackled to convention, to tradition, and it oppresses them. You can see the antinomian Blake in all this. We want to get rid of all social conventions. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church pulse. So the chimney sweeper, I said it blackens the inside of the chimneys, but it also blackens the outside. If you look at Victorian landscapes in the 19th century and even in the 20th century, all these old buildings that are black on the outside from soot. And the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls, probably a reference to the French Revolution, or just the state killing its opponents. But mostly, through midnight streets, I hear how the youthful harlot, so a prostitute who gives birth to a child, and the first sound that the child hears is his mother's cursing him for his birth, because now he will be a source of misery for her. She'll have to feed him. She'll have to look after him. And it's another mouth to feed on top of her own. And blights with plagues the marriage hearse. A hearse is a car that takes away the dead bodies, whereas a marriage car would carry a married couple. So you get the contradiction of every good in the city. So it's a very bleak portrait of the city in Blake's London. Any comments or questions? It's a really quick overview. He's an extraordinary poet and also very powerful, but also highly problematic in his conceptualization of things. Even though we're going to agree on what he decries for the most part, that doesn't mean that what he recommends is what we're going to agree with. But I'll leave it off with that. I see no questions, so done for today.